Everybody, hope you're doing well. Just coming out with another one of these patron request videos. So for those of you who don't know, if you become a patron of mine at the $10 level, you can request that to do a video on a topic of your choice, so long as it pretty much relates to philosophy, theology, something like that. I also have a number of videos, non-patron request videos in the pipeline here. For example, in the very near future, within a week, I hope, I'm going to be coming out with a video responding to Redeemed Zoomer's takedown of Catholic claims. Specifically, I'm going to be replying to his claim that the papacy essentially ratified the conciliarist heresy, thereby undermining Vatican I at the Council of Constance. That's a really tough issue. I think it's the only argument that he provided that I think is worth responding to, if I'm being totally honest. So that's what I'm going to be responding to. But anyway, the topic of this video, though, per a patron's request, is essentially how it is that perhaps not just Thomism, but medieval philosophy, medieval Catholic theology, or other philosophy, like essentially the Catholic vision of the cosmos, the classical vision of the cosmos, maybe we can say more broadly, how that is essential for not so much grounding the metaphysics of ethics in itself, but specifically in grounding the obligatory dimension of morality. In other words, how we really need to turn to a classical metaphysical picture of the world that I think is refined in Catholic philosophy, how we need to do that in order to provide a solid basis for the obligatory dimension of ethics. It's one thing to establish a metaphysical foundation for moral principles. I think it's quite another thing to jump from that to the truly obligatory nature of ethics as such. And not so much just that moral precepts are obligatory, but that there is really some binding force behind that obligation that can be really and concretely recognized for everyday people. So first things first, I want to talk about how the classical metaphysical picture of the world, which, as I say, I think reached its greatest refinement in my judgment through the philosophy of St. Thomas, how this is uniquely capable of grounding the phenomenon of moral oughts. And therefore, in bridging that is-ought gap that was put forward by David Hume and, of course, by secularists today. Well, at its most foundational level, I think you find this in perhaps more subtle, yet no less critical classical intuitions having to do with the convertibility of being and goodness, essentially. So I think you find the means by which we can ground ethics ultimately in this convertibility of being and goodness that is found at the heart of St. Thomas's metaphysics. In other words, so what does that mean? It means that our rational conceptions of truth and of goodness are essentially grounded in one and the same reality, namely in being. Of course, approached, however, from different intellectual vantage points. Here's what St. Thomas has to say about it. He says, quote, "Goodness and being are really the same, and they differ only in idea, which is clear from the following argument. The essence of goodness consists in this, that it is in some way desirable." That's how Aristotle defines it. So hence the philosopher says goodness is what all desire. Now it is desirable, or rather now it is clear that a thing is desirable only in as much as it is perfect, for all desire their own perfection. But everything is perfect insofar as it is actual. Therefore it is clear that a thing is perfect so far as it exists, for it is existence that makes all things actual, as is clear from the foregoing. Hence it is clear that goodness and being are the same really, but goodness presents a different aspect of desirableness, which being does not present, unquote. So what St. Thomas is saying here is that our conception of goodness, our conception of the good, which is the basis of all ethics, right? That which is good and doing that which is good and avoiding that which is evil. That's the first precept of the natural law. That has to be rooted essentially in the being of things. So there is no is-ought gap simply by virtue of metaphysical necessity here, because our perception of the good, our intuition of the good, only makes sense in relationship to the realization of some perfection. And perfection is first and foremost a metaphysical term. It's a metaphysical concept. It pertains to the completeness of being in a thing. Right? We say something is more or less perfect to the degree that it conforms to the nature it receives by virtue of its act of existence. So a triangle is more perfect to the degree that it conforms to triangularity. A heart is more or less perfect to the degree that it performs its functions that are designated to it by virtue of its nature, its definition as a heart, right? And so inasmuch as a thing conforms more or less to the demands of its nature, which is received by the act of existence given to it, ultimately by God, that is the means by which we determine whether something is more or less perfect. And that applies for all things. That applies to all things that exist. And in that sense, in locating the good in the will's recognition of degrees of perfection, I think you actually find another key insight that classical metaphysics brings to the picture of ethics, which I think is very important and necessary, which is to say that it actually it makes ethics fundamentally not an anthropocentric exercise. So what do I mean by that? So what I mean by this is that it situates human ethics into a framework, a metaphysical framework that can be considered entirely apart from human morality. In other words, human morality is one instance of what is a universal pattern of being. This is because for St. Thomas, the natural law is not simply a code of universal ethics for man to adhere to, but is itself a participation in the eternal law of the whole cosmos by the rational creature. In other words, the very same principles of intelligibility that are imbued in a rock, the tree, the dog, the nebulae, they're also imbued in us, and human morality is none other than our adherence to these principles through the cooperation of our reason and will. The rational and volitional element of this participation is the only thing that really distinguishes the natural law from the principles of intelligibility that are found in the rest of the cosmos. So just as, for example, a tree participates in its perfective nature by growing according to the demands of its nutritive soul, so likewise, we participate in our perfective nature by living in accordance with the demands of our human nature, which are what they are irrespective of artificial, mental, social, or political constructs. It's our human participation in a reality that is fundamentally cosmic in scope. And I think that provides for us a deeper grounding for ethics, that it's really rooted in the being of things. It's rooted in a reality that can be considered quite independent of, as I say, artificial, mental, social, or political constructs. Now that enables us to ground the obligations of ethics in something truly and fundamentally extramental. That is the basis by which we say morality is truly objective. Now, classical metaphysics, this classical picture of the world, this natural law morality, I think it also, on the other hand, without contradicting what I said earlier, affords human morality with this cosmic scope of significance, in as much as it is human morality. So it avoids anthropocentrism, I would say, in the wrong direction, but it affirms a different level of anthropocentrism in the right direction, while so in avoiding anthropocentrism in the wrong direction, we avoid the subjectivity of ethics, full stop. So we avoid the kind of anthropocentrism that subjectivizes human morality, essentially, by making it a purely human exercise. Um, but we also affirm a different level of anthropocentrism that imbues in human morality in particular a cosmic scope of significance. So it's kind of fulfilling two desirable outcomes at the same time. So how does it do this element of the equation? Well, it's essentially, I would say, the eternal significance of human moral action in this framework is rooted in what I would call medieval microcosmism, and also in the absolute primacy of Christ. And I realize that is more of a non-Thomistic idea, but it is a thoroughly classical medieval idea for sure. It's an idea that is very much rooted in the classical patristic tradition, more prevalent among Eastern fathers, of course, but certainly picked up by many prominent scholastics, medieval scholastics as well. So I'm thinking of Robert Grosseteste, for example. I'm thinking of course, John Duns Scotus. Albert the Great also held the idea of the primacy of Christ. So not only does that provide, not only is that going to provide a sound metaphysical foundation for the obligatory nature of ethics by bridging the is-ought gap, this is going to enable us to situate human ethics with a scope of significance that is truly cosmic. And so what do I mean by medieval microcosmism? Well, this is essentially the idea that the human person sums up everything in creation. The human person is made up of three fundamental elements, right? A mineral element, a living element, and a rational element. And even within the living element, we have vegetative, we have animal. So man is made up of fundamental elements that comprise the rest of the cosmos. We have the mineral being fulfilled, but then we also have nutritive soul, and we have animal soul. So we have the capacity for growth. And we also have the inner and outer senses, and we reproduce after our own kind. So we share that in common with plants and animals, but we also share in common with the angels rational intellection. We have intellect and will. And so in that sense, the human person comprises the whole cosmos. The human person is this microcosm of the cosmos, representative of the whole cosmos, summing up everything that came before. And so the human person is in a way created in order to enable the whole of the cosmos to stand in right relationship and in right praise of the one creator, so that his actions, his moral actions are in a certain way representative of the rest of creation. So we have this role of cosmic representative in the human person, which clearly adds a layer of eternal significance to, an eternal and cosmic significance, I would say, to human moral action. And moreover, then you take it a step further. So this is something that all the tradition agrees with. But then you take it a step further to the absolute primacy of Christ. And in the absolute primacy of Christ, we see the microcosm of human nature taking on, being created and designated for this purpose of reconciling at a maximum level of intimacy, divinity and the cosmos, bringing the divinity and the cosmos together in this perfect union, in this perfect marriage, in this most intimate nuptial marriage between divinity and the cosmos as summed up in a human nature. And that is, of course, in the incarnation itself. And so not only do we have a cosmic scope and significance to human morality, but we also have the fact that our morality is in some way related to and participating in this grand unification of divinity and the cosmos, which stands as the ultimate purpose for the sake of which God created anything. And so, as I say, not only does everything that we've already talked about provide this foundation for the obligatory nature of ethics, so we've bridged the is-ought gap, we also have human ethics situated within a scope of significance that is truly cosmic. For even if we're able to establish this firm metaphysical basis for oughts, which we've already done, it still needs to be established that the ramifications of violating the ontological order of reality amounts to something that can do justice to the way in which human behavior stands out from the rest of the cosmos without falling into an arbitrary anthropocentrism. So while we would diverge a little bit from Thomism to make this case through the absolute primacy of Christ, we can nevertheless make this case very easily by appealing to this doctrine of the absolute primacy of Christ, which states that prior to the creation of the cosmos itself, God had in the first order of his intentionality the incarnation of the Son of God as the predestined final goal of all of creation. And because that is the case, because the creation of the human person is ultimately for the sake of that grand unification, the parousia, that is fundamentally in Christ, that adds a far greater level of significance to human morality than even would be established by the fact that human nature is the microcosm by itself. So I think that the Christian tradition, this classical Christian tradition that I've been talking about, it fulfills everything we need it to fulfill in grounding the metaphysics of ethics, but also providing that binding force behind the obligatory nature of ethics by broadening the scope of significance to that cosmic level. So that's just what I wanted to say on that topic. I hope the patron who requested that I do this topic finds it helpful and useful. And so that's just a reminder that if you want me to make a video on a topic of your choice, you can feel free to become a patron of mine. That's for the $10 level, but at the $5 level, you still got a lot. You get monthly book recommendations. You get over 100 pages of catechetical notes that I've written, that I've drawn up, and you also get unlimited Q&A access through the messaging system per every month that you're subscribed. So that's what I have to say on that. Like I say, just keep a watch out for uploads in the near future, unrelated to patron requests as well. So God bless you, and I'll see you in the next one.